If she ain't black, she white. Jennifer Lopez is just a white woman with a ham and cheese.
Look at that. It's almost like I said, it's almost like I've been saying that a lot of black people work off of only the if you're not black you're white, and that just like how the white people, a lot of white people, especially back in the racist days, one drop rule type shit, say if you're not white you're black. um yeah, so it's almost like every single day the shit I say gets proven right. This is why a lot of people call natives white. They don't see us as POC. That's why they come into our spaces and think that they're going to invoke some type of white guilt. This is why they think that, many of them think that non black people are like, they're the only ones that can experience racism because they see everybody else as white. Like I said, some black people, right? Because I know a lot of motherfuckers like to have selective hearing and be outraged just so they can call somebody racist when they don't even know the definition of racism. But yeah, so yet another example of what the fuck I've been saying.
A lot of crazy stuff has been happening on TikTok in the last few days, and I have a few thoughts on the things I've seen. Jennifer Lopez is indeed racially white. She is exactly what a white Latina looks like. I know many have this perception of whiteness based on this developed ideology mainly created by Anglos and the caste system, where whiteness is defined as blonde hair and blue eyes, but not all white people are that. I know some are still unaware that the concept of race comes from the Iberian Peninsula, and people from that region are not all pasty, which is why I often present the Cristiano Ronaldo example. He is a white man that is not pasty. You will constantly see this problem of ignorance because a lot of people don't know their own history. Latin America has a very long history of whitewashing that started the moment the Spanish and the Portuguese arrived in the Americas. Native Americans and African people were brainwashed into an ideology placing white people on top of a hierarchy. And to really understand why conversations like this even happen today, you have to go back to the colonial period, because this wasn't random. It was structured. When Spain and Portugal colonized Latin America in the 1500s, they didn't just conquer land, they built an entire racial system to organize society. This became known as the caste system, or sistema de castas. At the top were Europeans born in Europe, peninsulars. Right below them were criollos, people of European descent born in the Americas. Then came everyone else, mestizos, mulattoes, zambos, labels that described different types of racial mixing. And at the bottom were indigenous people and enslaved Africans. Whiteness became associated with purity, superiority, and civilization. And anything outside of that, indigenous or African, was pushed down the hierarchy. Unlike the United States, Latin America didn't always enforce strict racial segregation. Instead, it developed something else, mestizage, or racial mixing. Families would encourage their children to marry lighter-skinned partners to advance the family. The idea was that each generation could become whiter, and therefore more socially accepted, more successful, more civilized. So even though Latin America embraced racial mixing, it did so under a hierarchy where whiteness was still the ideal. And this didn't stop after colonialism ended. Spanish and Portuguese men often had children with indigenous and African women, many times through coercion or unequal power dynamics. Over time, this created large mixed populations across Latin America. But even though mixing was common, equality was not. Because within this system, there was still a clear goal: get closer to whiteness. And that's where the idea of mejorar la raza comes in, improve the race. This wasn't just a saying. It became a social strategy. Families would encourage their children to marry lighter-skinned partners to advance the family. The idea was that each generation could become whiter, and therefore more socially accepted, more successful, more civilized. So even though Latin America embraced racial mixing, it did so under a hierarchy where whiteness was still the ideal. And this didn't stop after colonialism ended. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, many Latin American countries actively pursued whitening policies. Also known as blanqueamiento, countries like Brazil encouraged massive European immigration from places like Italy and Germany. Argentina did the same and even promoted the idea that it was essentially a white European nation. Mexico leaned into mestizaje as a national identity, but still centered lighter skin as the image of progress. The belief was simple: more Europeans meant a more modern, more advanced society. At the same time, black and indigenous people were often erased or minimized. In some countries, people could literally become white over generations, which I've talked about before, through wealth, status, and lighter skin. And this wasn't just an abstract idea, it was something openly promoted in society. You can even see it reflected in works like Rey de no Sao de Cham, where a black grandmother is shown celebrating the birth of her lighter-skinned grandchild, visually representing the belief that each generation should become whiter, and that this was something to be grateful for. So when we fast forward to today, and people argue about whether someone like Jennifer Lopez is white, what we're really seeing is the result of all this history colliding with modern American racial categories. Because Latino is not a race. It's an ethnicity. There are Latinos who are white, black, indigenous, mixed, everything. But due to centuries of colonial hierarchy, colorism, and whitening policies, lighter skin is still often privileged, and sometimes assumed to be the default. And that's why people get confused, because they're applying a very narrow, Anglo-centric definition of whiteness, blonde hair, blue eyes, to a region that was shaped by a lot of complexities that seem to cause a lot of cognitive dissonance on TikTok. A lot of people claim to be Native American or indigenous as they refer to themselves, while having a very racially ambiguous phenotype. That cognitive dissonance comes to the forefront when you have individuals on TikTok who claim to be advocates for marginalized groups and yet support whiteness.
Of said systemic oppression and counter it that way. No, what you manage to do is kind of be like, it's okay now to attack white people because of systemic racism. All white people. And that's fucking wrong. And you're going to get nowhere with that. It's not the way.
Which I find very interesting because I always see this particular TikToker constantly mentioning what he perceives as white people being unfairly treated or blamed. Meanwhile, them folks are talking like this.
If you call me a colonizer, I'm going to make you cry, and I'm not going to feel bad about it, okay? It's not my fault that my ancestors were better at fighting than yours. Okay, it's not my fault your ancestors were so bad at fighting they got colonized. Maybe your ancestors should have fought better. Maybe your ancestors should have been better at fighting. But no, we sucked at fighting, and that's why we won. Not my fault.
Now, given that some people portray themselves as being so passionate about their ancestors and about marginalized groups, one would think that you'd stray away from defending the children of the Mayflower. And this is why it's so hard to take people who defend them folks seriously. You claim to be an advocate and are out to defend yourselves and your ancestors so much that you're on TikTok live using the hard ER like this Lakota Reyna lady. But when it comes to the folks that have oppressed you and others, you're silent like a church mouse. I have a question. How is this defending yourself?
Y'all are the face of the BBLs.
That
Miss
is
Natural
true.
Body Blueprint. Why are y'all getting fake asses, tummy tucks, and big old titties for? And y'all are starting to look like Kardashians.
And even
Who
the
y'all claim wanna
Kardashians,
look
the
like you.
Kardashians actually stopped liking it and took it out. They, you know what? They gave up on that stuff.
So
Anyways,
the BBL
original.
industry is because of y'all. Now, plastic surgery, yes, white women get, injections and things like that, tummy tucks. But y'all are the face of BBL. Look at Fashion Nova.
How about this?
Black folks is always in brown people's business. So, and then they cry about everybody else being in their business, right? And this is why I say what the fuck I say. You black bitches need to stay in your motherfucking black ass lane.
Which brings me to something that I noticed on Asian Talk. Conversations were being had about dating white people while decentering whiteness. Which in my opinion can't be done. You can't decenter your whiteness when your entire world revolves around it. What do you guys think? What does it actually look like to decenter your whiteness in practice? Before I get out of here, I have a few questions for people who claim to be advocates. What does liberation actually look like to you? What steps are required to achieve it? What does something like land back require in reality? And what's currently stopping you, or your community, from getting there?